Okay, let me just share with you that there was an executive order because the concern is that we, as was just described, there's no new money. We have this burgeoning aging of the population. What are we going to do about it? There's also a task force. How many of you have heard of the Governor's Task Force on Alzheimer's Prevention and Preparedness? Okay. That effort, I am meeting with the group tomorrow in the governor's office. Maria Shriver's the chair. If you haven't heard about it, please, please, please look it up. Find out who's on the task force. There are 30 people on the task force. They're going to be meeting to go around California to figure out what Californians want to do about Alzheimer's disease. They have to provide a report. That task force will have a report that will fold into the Master Plan on Aging for California. So what I want to share with you is this. As the Chronic Disease Control Branch Chief for the state, all of you leaders and blood pressure control, I want you to know every meeting I go to, and my boss can attest to this, is blood pressure control. It's the one thing the populace understands and that we can do so much about. It's everything we've talked about today. So, a couple things. I will mention to Maria and the team tomorrow that the one thing that this group, now, you don't have to agree with me or not, but I'll just say my impression from my meeting yesterday with leaders is that blood pressure control is the one thing we can do for Alzheimer's in California. And that should hold into the Master Plan on Aging. And I'm sharing that with you because they're not looking to me for the answer on the Master Plan on Aging. There's going to be public comment. You can go online and you as organizations can put some of this logic because guess what? They're not coming to Caroline and I for public health or growing public health. The Master Plan on Aging is how the state of California is going to do business better for each of us that's growing older and how we're going to do health systems. Everything you're talking about, all these details could be put into the Master Plan on Aging. Or at least there could be a proposal to further look at some of these ideas beyond what Figueroa described, which is just Medicaid. That's just one element. Think of everything that we do in government. That's what the Master Plan on Aging is. So it's an opportunity, but I'm sharing with you what I'm going to say tomorrow, and I just want you to know that that's what I'm doing, so that if you see something later, you're like, okay, Jessica followed through. And I'm going to volunteer all of you. I'll say, oh, you know, there's a group that met that are 100% behind me and have great ideas, and it's known and it's evidence-based and it's supported by the federal government. Okay?
And as usual,
yes.
Bill Balmer is on it. Our chairman here, Mr. Blood Pressure Champion of the Sacramento region, and the reason that I mention that is he's already teed up the head of cognitive programs from UC Davis to be our speaker here on January 13th. You're all invited back because the nexus between cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline is incredibly strong. And not only that, if you think about Steve Sidney's tsunami slide about heart failure, if we had been nailing blood pressure like we all agree we need to, we wouldn't be seeing that huge uptick of heart failure.
And Dr. Arevalo is on the Master Plan on Aging Task Force also. So we have leaders of right care. So I just thought I'd share it with everyone because you should all know who's in the room, that you actually have FaceTime today and at the reception with the people that are going to make policy that Caroline and I will then have to implement.
So we are going to take it up a notch on blood pressure, and we are going to think outside the box in a couple of ways. I'm going to throw an idea out there. Can we as the state of California do for blood pressure what we did for smoking? Big public education campaign. Can we have an 800 coaching line? Can we have some pharmacists, possibly centrally located, to assist the medical groups? Can we just say, what we've been doing isn't working. Look at the numbers. I'm sorry. It's just too important for our society to get it right. So I just urge you all to think innovatively. And with that, I'll say, Mr. Innovation Award, Joe Skye, come on up here. Bill, if you would please get those slides going. We're going to shift our topic to now say, you know what, we can handle blood pressure, but we need to think much more broadly. And so we've got some wonderful guests that have flown in from Minnesota. Thank you, Blue Zones, for coming in, because they're going to show us how on a community level we can shift our numbers on blood pressure, but we have to get beyond the clinic wall. So with that, I'm going to welcome back to the podium our co-chair, Joe Skye, the Air Force guy, Chief of Cardiology for the Air Force, to talk about how he grew up in a blue zone and what a blue zone is, and how he uses it to get his soldiers and pilots and astronauts into a very healthy, zero defects, zero heart attacks, get to fly that plane space. And part of it is through the blue zones that the National Geographic and the National Institutes of Aging have helped with. So this is a very different concept, and thank you for bringing it to us, Joe.
Thanks. This morning I went from being the speaker right before lunch when everybody was hungry to the post-lunch when everyone was going to be sleepy. Now I'm afraid we're getting back towards the hangry again, right?
No, this is good.
We're right in the nice area. So actually, this talk was originally supposed to be getting towards zero for preventable heart attack, stroke, and diabetes, deaths, and disabilities, insight, and my recommendations for what we can do. And I think the day has been very busy, and Hattie blended that with our next goal, which is to introduce the blue zones. And so first I'll go through insight, and I want to mention these are my own opinions, formed on my experiences, and don't represent official policy. I want to tell a story. I want to tell the story of aerospace medicine and how they were challenged decades ago to reach a goal that at the time was just as impressive as trying to get to zero. And I also want to tell the story about how a type of science that the medical community doesn't normally use was thrust upon physicians that worked at the School of Aerospace Medicine, and they were forced to work in a way that they weren't used to working, and how I believe that should inform our use of trials and registries and perhaps change our perspective on what happens. And then lastly, as we think about where prevention happens, that will transition nicely into the fact that we now realize that much of our prevention happens outside of the doctor's office, and will lead us into our presentation this afternoon for the blue zones. Let's make it very clear. This idea of getting to zero is really a moonshot of sorts, right? And we're going to have to be ambitious. I heard earlier today that we don't need new tools from Betsy, but perhaps we need to use the tools we have in innovative ways. Perhaps we need to blend varieties of specialties, such as pharmacists and primary care, and maybe even community organizers, and use everything in innovative ways. And so to go back and look at the original Moonshot, in November of 1963, John F. Kennedy dedicated the School of Aerospace Medicine in San Antonio. And at the time there was some controversy with this because it was a tremendous amount of resources to put thousands of physicians and medical personnel dedicated just to studying the human performance for pilots, because of course astronauts had to come from the pilot corps of primarily the Air Force and the Navy at the time. Where's Dr. Flynn? So the dedication speech that President Kennedy gave focused on this, and he wanted to inspire the nation to recognize that this investment in the highest of human performance would yield benefits from all of us. And he believed that we would learn more about normal humans when we study the best of humans. And I'm excited today to tell you about two of these examples, coronary calcium, and some of you may know that aerobics came from the space program.
But who knew Velcro came from the space program? And solar panels and GPS. I didn't know any of that.
Yeah. So to put this in context, at the time, aircraft had become remarkably safe. By 1950, there were only 40 accidents per million flights. And by the time John F. Kennedy gave the dedication for the School of Aerospace Medicine, that had almost dropped in half. And as you can see, we are currently down to a very low rate of 0.1 fatal accidents per million flights. How this leads into high reliability science is the way that the politicians and the Kennedy administration organized the medical aspect of the space program was they put the doctors under the engineers. And this was unprecedented. The Air Force had been organized that way in 1947 to break the tradition of having doctors be in charge. And they decided to continue that for the space program. So what that led to was this concept of high reliability science, where the medical community suddenly was forced into a situation where they had to think like the engineers. And the science that had led to this remarkable improvement in the safety of aircraft, where you had to just work. The idea of building the plane as you fly it was you were adept enough to learn from improvements that you could make in real time as you were testing your devices. And the time I spent at Edwards Air Force Base illustrates that that takes a particular type of flexibility, and it takes the confidence to not wait until you have blinded controlled trials to say, we can make a difference, we can change something. So it was, again, it was a science of necessity. Blinding or waiting for prospective trials was just not an option, especially for the scientists of the space program where their nation had called them to do something very quickly. Let me give you an example of what this is like. In the spring of 2018, Southwest Airlines had its first fatal accident ever. In 50 years of flying, a single individual died when a fan blade exploded. The registries and the data collection that goes into high reliability science is impressive. In a matter of weeks, the FAA and the European Safety Administration were able to analyze the 30,000 of those aircraft engines that were still in existence, with 500 airlines and 800 hours of flight, and almost in real time, put them back in the air with confidence that they had found the problem and corrected the inspection schedules and be able to know that they could put those engines back into flight safely. Imagine if we had that type of data registries, which I think we're headed towards that with electronic medical records, but it will take a shift in our thinking to have the confidence to use data that's not blinded. So what happened then was the early leaders of the space program said, we want the humans to be just as safe as the equipment. And this was a challenge. And entire chapters of books and publications have been written about this. So in one slide, I'll do my best. Crew failure happens rarely, about 10% of the time. Medical aspects of crew failure is only 10% of that. Therefore, human incapacitation should only occur 1 billion flying hours. Cardiovascular mortality is the most significant aspect of incapacitation, or the most common cause. And even in the healthiest individuals, the frequency is still too high. So to this day, for anyone who flew here today, you had 2 pilots on your aircraft because of this math. And with that, the incapacitation rate that was acceptable was about 1 in a million, or an annual rate of 1%. Now that the School of Aerospace Medicine was given that goal, they now had to look at the event horizon, or the period of time that we had to keep pilots that healthy, and then out of the pilot corps was going to come the astronauts. And that was about 10 to 20 years. As is often the case in science, other scientists had looked at the commercial data for actual real-world fatal mishaps and found that the testing capabilities for cardiovascular disease were inadequate. They had missed the events that led to problems with the testing. So there was a need for better predictors of heart disease in this low-risk, apparently healthy population. And within a couple of months of that study coming out and that call, the School of Aerospace Medicine set out to create a registry that was collected data for almost 20 years. All of the known screening tests at the time were used, and around 1,500 asymptomatic aviators all received angiography as part of this occupational high reliability type of data. They treated this just like you would an aircraft engine or a wing or something like this. And this data was all used to create a screening algorithm, much like the equation Dr. Balmer showed. I probably should have included the equation. But coronary calcium became the test that was most useful for screening in the asymptomatic individuals. And this started back in the 1970s. So in parallel to this, our exposure in the civilian world to coronary calcium was very different, right? So I'm here today to tell you that whatever you thought of coronary calcium in the past, make no mistake about it, the military, NASA, and especially the aviation community successfully used coronary calcium to make flying one of the safest endeavors that we have. And as was published recently in the aerospace medicine literature, there has not been in the airlines, the commercial airlines of the world, and the air forces of the world that use this type of screening protocols, there has not been a fatal accident attributable to cardiovascular disease. And the same is true for space travel. So as we move forward, in 2002, the physicians at Walter Reed Army Medical Center wanted to build on the success of the coronary calcium program that had been used in the aerospace medicine community. And so they opened up a second registry at Walter Reed, and this time included women, around 30%. And Dr. Balmer already stole the data, or stole the show earlier with the slides. But around 13,000 people followed for 10 years. And as you can see, the important points are the power of zero. So these are people that do not need treatment based for the time period that they were followed, and the benefit of knowing that and being able to focus your resources on people that do have coronary calcium, and then the positive association with treatment, focusing our resources on these individuals that will benefit from the treatment. So to summarize this, the strength of coronary calcium is that it is effective in the asymptomatic, apparently healthy population. It has been used to promote safety, and now I believe as we move forward to the 2018 American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association guidelines, we have a chance for a reset in thinking for those who have not been using it the way myself and others were lucky enough to use it and to see it work. We have a chance for everyone to get a reset and perhaps use this more as a tool for shared decision making and for focusing our resources effectively. Whether it's prospective trials that have been later found to have been, maybe had some lack of integrity, or perhaps the negative result trials that never get published, the line between success and failure is very thin. And I think that I would encourage everyone to think of data, whether it's open, unblinded registries that are analyzed prospectively and retrospectively, that as long as we meticulously look at the data and analyze it, that we can be successful and learn from our mistakes and learn what else works. So I told you that aerobics came from the space program. An exciting aspect that I learned when I arrived as staff at the School of Aerospace Medicine and got to work in that same basement. We did have better air conditioning then when I was there, was that Dr. Ken Cooper was a young physician, and he became immediately impressed that those individuals that were healthier passed their flight physicals better and were better candidates for the space program the more aerobically fit they were. And he went ahead and created what became the fitness program and the health program for the pilots, which then rapidly spread to all three services and to the military in general, virtually eliminated type 2 diabetes. As many of you know, he's still alive and well and working at the Cooper Institute in Dallas, Texas. So, where does prevention happen? This slide now is common knowledge. A few years ago when I first learned about it, I thought, what in the world did I do? I spent all that time, and I only make a difference 20% of the time. But today we have an opportunity to learn about the other things, and we will see that the science from the blue zones, which is in essence high reliability science, if we are comfortable enough to look at this type of data and look at how we can work as a community, I believe that we will have our best chance of getting to zero. This picture to me, in addition to just getting to meet some neat guys, later that day, Bud Anderson had been a commander at Edwards Air Force Base of the flight test program, and had been someone who had perfected the art of high reliability science. He invited me and the other flight surgeons to come to a little get-together where he and Yeager and some of the other test pilots were going to just reminisce about their days there at Edwards. And what I learned was that it was really a sense of community that had led to the success of the space program, that they worked together with multiple different disciplines. I've already illustrated how doctors found themselves working for engineers. And I think that this illustrates to me the value of community and how we'll learn from what Tony Buechner and we will learn from the Blue Zones presentation. Thanks. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and invite Tony Buechner and Ben up.
So thank you, Tony and Ben, for flying out from Minnesota to bring your
Thank you, Joe. Hey, what we have learned from the longest living populations around the world, that on average, lifestyles or environments nudge them to move naturally every 20 minutes. You guys been sitting a while. Why don't we all stand up and have this quick step?
Sorry, I haven't had a chance to say hi.
My vibe? Vibe check. It's a little tired, but it's okay. It's a little tired outside. The weather's tired. Wait, is this? Oh, no, sorry. I thought it was a tour. Oh, okay. I was like, oh no, it totally is. I was like, it's a tour! We're getting there.
Yeah, okay. I will live in there.
All right, everyone can see it. We'll have to get started here today.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. I've never stood in one place ever in my life. I think I can stand behind there. I'll tip over. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us out today. Very, very excited. My name is Tony Buechner. I'm the national spokesperson for Blue Zones and City of Business Development. How many of you, raise your hands if you had heard about Blue Zones prior to this event? Great. So I think there's complementary issues of National Geographic. They did a whole magazine on our work. But what some people don't understand excuse me.
believe that Joe Sky is a little over 100 years old.
Yeah. This is kind of like workout. Okay. It's kind of pushing up to the door.
I think we've all seen, while we're waiting here, how instrumental Sacramento, California has been leading the way, etc. We've looked at things like clinics, like patients, like school children, etc. Is it time to really expand into the community? And I think that presentation we're going to hear about is, can we go one more step for social determinants into the community? And I think Blue Sky is a way of looking at moving into the community, into the supermarkets, into the parks, into the organizations. And I think that Sacramento, in the red zone you saw for high risk, is a good place to consider that, and I think Tony is going to
Success.
talk about that.
We're off and running. All right, well, what I was saying is, what people don't know is that we've been doing research for the last 15 years on the happiest places in the world. How can we learn from these places? I'll bring that information back to our communities. People always like to understand, how did Blue Zones get started? So I'm going to start with that. I come from a family of 4 boys from Minneapolis. Growing up, we loved each other. We were entrepreneurs together. We played on sports teams. We did adventures. So as we started to graduate from high school and college, my older brother Dan came to us and said, before we start our careers, let's go on one last expedition, adventure. He suggested a bike ride, so our team put our back tire in the Antarctic Ocean and bicycled 15,000 miles to the tip of South America. And for all you really smart people, I've seen a lot of letters behind your names here. If you look at it, it's really not that big a deal. It's all downhill. Just a real long hill. 2 years later, he suggested that we bicycle from Minneapolis to St. Paul, about 16 miles. I said I had Saturday afternoon off, but being the older being big brother, he made us bicycle the long way, about 14,000 miles around the 45th parallel, and then 2 years later from the northern tip of Africa, the southern tip. The reason I share these with you aren't to brag about accomplishments, but to articulate what it did for boys from Minnesota. It opened our eyes to different faiths, different foods, and how families were set up and how communities were set up, and it set us on a path of adventure. It also caught the eye of National Geographic that asked Dan and his team if they'd be interested in finding the longest lived populations and doing a story on it.